Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. Apologies for the little bit of a delay. What's a conference without some technical difficulties, right? But yes, thank you so much for joining us here today. Please take a seat, and we are going to begin. So I want to welcome everybody to Preservation Utah and the Utah State Historic Preservation Office's 2022 Preservation Conference. My name is Kelsey Moss, and I'm the Associate Director here at Preservation Utah. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Ute, Paiute, Gashute, and Shoshone tribes. We recognize the continuing connections to lands, waters, communities, and pay respect to the Indigenous stewards and elders past. At its very heart is tied to community, and today we aim to celebrate all the communities that make up Utah, discuss how we can advocate and preserve their historic places, and grow our own community even further. You'll also notice that we're in a fabulous venue, a little bit non-traditional. This is the Art Castle. It previously was the 15th Ward and LA East Studios. We've compiled some histories that are in your programs and throughout the building, and so we really hope that you dive into that history with us today. The Utah Arts Alliance is the new steward of this building, and they also have some information throughout the building talking about the restoration efforts and how you can help. So there's some QR codes that we encourage you to scan. This event is made possible because of our fabulous sponsors. So a huge, huge thank you to our keynote sponsor, the Utah Division of State History, to our cornerstone sponsor, Hogan Construction, our buttress sponsors of CRSA, the Utah Main Street Program, Alexander Company, and the GBX Group. A big thank you to Capitol Hill Construction, who helped support Saturday's historic window workshop, Rimini Coffee, that provided the delicious coffee in the back, so please fill up your cups. And last but not least, All City Event Rentals, who provided the tables and chairs that we are using today. And a huge thank you once again to the Utah Arts Alliance, who welcomed us with open arms into their building and generously donated this space. So thank you to all of these amazing sponsors, without which this event could not happen. With any conference, we have some housekeeping items before we get going. You are going to notice we are in a historic building. It's a unique space. So we do have maps in the program that outline the different areas. We're going to have some guides. If you see any staff, please ask questions. There are 3 main rooms is the big thing to know. We have the chapel, which is here. This room will also be streamed online, so just something to keep in mind. We have the gym, which is up the stairs, the split level stairs, and then we have the studio, which is down the hall. So those are the 3 spaces that all the conference sessions will be taking place in. Lunch will be at 12:20, and that's going to be down the stairs. This is a boxed lunch, and you can eat wherever you'd like in the space. There's no set area as long as it's not off limits. We have recycling, so please be kind to Mother Earth and recycle. And what last thing? Oh yes, and we do have a social at the end around 5:30. We were going to try and ask, so there's no pressure, but by a show of hands, we're trying to get numbers. Is anyone interested in attending? Please raise your hand. This is helpful for us for counts? Okay, great. And if you change your mind, that's fine. If you are interested at any point, Amber, raise a little higher for Amber in the back. But if you are interested, you change your mind, let me know, let Amber know, and we will update those counts. So great. Any announcements that happen in the day, we have room monitors in each space, so they will provide, because this is the only time we're all together, so they'll provide updates in the room spaces. So that is all the fun housekeeping items. So now we can get started. And I have the great honor and privilege of introducing our keynote speaker today, Claudia Loayza. Claudia is passionate about the intersections of opportunity, place, and justice. City planning became her conduit for this drive, and she believes that the state of a community depends on how accessible it is for the public to work, play, navigate, and thrive in their environments, especially for historically marginalized groups. She's a second-year master's student in the University of Utah's City and Metropolitan Planning program to better address disparities in city planning, community engagement, and access to critical services from a systemic approach. In 2021, she was named a Utah Business 20 in their 20s honoree for her work in state government to push the boundaries of engagement and meeting people where they are. In her role as Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator with the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, she continues to advance opportunities for underrepresented groups at the state level and encourages trust building and collaboration with communities to address localized concerns through policy impact, youth empowerment, equity-centered communications, and capacity building for organization. Claudia encourages questions, so please feel free to ask your questions after her talk. But let's all welcome Claudia as she discusses power of community memory, preserving and creating resonating places. Welcome, Claudia.
All right, good morning, everyone. I picked the wrong day to wear heels, so now I'm like a little too tall for the microphone, which is never the case. But thank you to Kelsey and to our State History Division and everyone involved in planning this incredible conference. I really find the message today around, and let me just be reminded, preservation engaged, celebrating Utah's communities. That's a theme that is really close to my heart. And I've learned so much just in my brief interaction with those that are here about this space and how intentional it was in choosing this space to really try to be accessible to Westside communities in different areas around the discussion of how we make sure we celebrate communities and their assets. And I do want to mention that I was taught and just learned today that apparently this stage is where, you know, the grace of Rihanna, John Williams, and all these really powerful kind of musical artists sang and performed. I cannot promise a dynamic performance like that. I don't sing except for in the shower, so I don't promise anything of that nature. But I do want to just start off again, and see if this will advance. Perfect. That my division that I'm representing is the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, and our director is Nubia Peña, who is also the governor's senior advisor on equity and opportunity. And we're the only state division uniquely positioned to advance equity and opportunity throughout the state of Utah. And we do that through community building, through partnership building, and trying to, again, to what Kelsey mentioned about our work, build that reciprocity in the systems that we operate in within state government. So I'm among friends here. I'm told that planners, preservationists, city staff, state park managers are here. And as you know, it was introduced, I am currently in a master's program. I'm graduating next Friday, so I'm almost done. But I'm among classmates too. Oh, thank you. It has been a long journey, but I've realized that there is really no clear-cut job description for the work that we do in preserving and celebrating community stories and places. So I think that's what really grounds us in this conversation today around community memory and creating and celebrating resonating spaces. So I'm gonna advance here. This is just a little icebreaker for you all. I know sometimes keynotes can be a little bit intimidating, but please know that I am that foodie loving, and it's really hard to see maybe with the lighting here, but I am a proud Latina. I'm a daughter of immigrants, and I really strongly believe that everyone has an origin story, and that when we allow for that origin story to lead us down the paths that, you know, bring us that joy and happiness, we can really reach a fulfilling and powerful future. So these are the people that have helped me along my journey, my amazing team, our MCA team, with a few different additions. One of my colleagues just had a baby, and we call him our baby nugget, so he's kind of like our team mascot, but he's the cutest thing. And again, I mentioned that my family, I come from a family of immigrants. My mom is from Puebla, Mexico, and my love of place, my love of public art and mural and just public expression really came from the stories and the different experiences I had in visiting my mother's hometown, and just being and wanting to be more involved and connected to what communities find valuable. So I'm gonna skip on ahead here. And here's my husband and I just eating a gigantic donut, just for, in case you didn't know what that was. So through my short remarks with you today, I hope that I just shared some 3 key things that I've learned in my journey and my experiences, again, around engagement. And I don't pretend to be an expert in it because I really see engagement as a evolving journey. to better understand the people that we serve, the communities that we have felt have been left behind, and then overall just really accepting that idea that once we know better, we should do better. So with this, community memory, as I mentioned, is kind of where I'm going to frame this conversation. And the reason that I'm leading with this is because I think all three of these points connect to the idea that every place, all this infrastructure kind of discussion that we tend to have as built environment professionals, really doesn't have much value unless we talk about the people behind who created that space and made it special. So to the first point, I feel that community memory encapsulates, again, these three things. Number one, the story is present. And again, this is what brings value and meaning to the places that we inhabit, that we work around, that we work in, that we work with. And this is a process of learning to appreciate and explore the full stories of a place and a people. And I believe that this creates shared value and proximity. And by proximity, I mean it's building that awareness of others and understanding the history of the people and place that we're working with. And sometimes that requires hard truths and reckoning with historical wrongs. But that also makes space for vulnerable moments between us and the people we serve. And I think that just creates a better relationship between us and our communities. And that goes into point two, where when we learn about the stories behind the walls, behind the buildings, the infrastructure, they become community memory. And I think it's a transition that is carried as a collective, right, as a community where they are. And for her, that meant, the grocery stores, the community centers, the schools, any shared space where people felt safe and willing to be their authentic selves. And that means engaging in relationship building and conversation and at the very, very least, seeking to connect rather than collect. So moving on here, I do want to just mention that when community memory comes to mind for me, it's really all about the stories. It's about trying to better connect to what is valuable for a community and what adds value to the infrastructure in place. And this is what stirs our minds and our hearts when we think about a place fondly, right? We maybe aren't thinking about the mediums or the stucco, or maybe sometimes that does bring a certain memory back to you. But I think for me, visiting a new place or visiting somewhere that I've been to before, it's really about connecting and reconnecting to what emotional response I had and how that adds to my lived identity, my lived experience, and again, what will add to my journey to become the person that I want to be. And I think that's a very dynamic way of thinking about places, especially when we think about the humans and the people that are going to use them. So again, preserving historic places, and really any place, is also about preserving stories and community memory beyond the physical aspects. So as I continue to share my thoughts with you, I want this question of what is your story? Or what is the story behind this place? What is the story behind the community and this initiative, this effort that we're engaging in together? And allow that to become a habit. Allow that to become the first thing that comes to mind when you start to engage the people that you're going to be serving, that are going to be impacted. Because when our spaces reflect these stories and we honor them, we celebrate the strengths of the communities there and are better able to address needs. So this is a quote that I was able to gather through a community survey I distributed as part of a project this past year. And I essentially asked many residents, diverse residents, about what their community, what was special about their community and what about their community resonated with them the most. And what kind of came about was a lot of stories and anecdotes about what was worth preserving and what made those particular communities worth living in. And one resident from West Valley City shared this, and they said, "What I love about my community is its diversity and how that shines through in restaurants, house decor, places of worship, and so many areas of life. That means a great deal to me. It makes me feel like I can breathe." Now I want to emphasize this last part of, it makes me feel like I can breathe. And it was surprising to me at first because I didn't make that connection, around how having a mural in an area or having, like she mentioned, house decor or just different places of worship as they were navigating their community, that was beyond, the aesthetics. It was maybe even beyond the placemaking elements, but it essentially created and equated to them life and breathing. It's what made them feel like their community was worth investing in. And I think that this is really what sustains and retains a community's ability to thrive. And we really start to think about the proximity and the reciprocity relationship that we have with communities. And I think if we balance those two by striving to seek and create more opportunities and experiences like this, where beyond the technical, beyond the best practice, we're striving to create that individual moment of where that person feels proud about where they live and affirmed for who they are based on where they live, I think that that creates really powerful experiences. So for me, this also brought to mind about how we can better approach placemaking, historic preservation, and engagement in a trauma-informed way. And that means acknowledging how entire neighborhoods and communities may have experienced displacement or continue to feel some damaging effects due to exclusionary land use practices. And some of these examples I'm going to present to you, you may already be familiar with, considering the people in this room. But I hope that I present them and I focus on some of the community values and maybe even some of the memories gained or lost because of some of the systemic barriers that have been affronted to them. So with that, let me start with our first one. So my friend Chris Merritt introduced to me Plum Alley quite a few years ago. And as you know, Plum Alley was Salt Lake City's Chinatown, original Chinatown. And in the early 1900s, it was a bustling Chinese immigrant community resulting from an influx of economic opportunities with things like the Transcontinental Railroad and other kind of industry-driven efforts. And it, again, was Salt Lake's original Chinatown in the heart of downtown. However, due to economic crises with the Great Depression and also some factors such as the fear of business competition and population growth, this caused some to greatly oppose the Chinese community's existence, and this led to its abandonment and its razing, and it's replaced now by a mid-sized parking garage that still stands today. And I have to say that as a Utahn born and raised here in Utah, it took me until well into my 20s to understand and learn more about the history of this particular area. And when I visited the space, I felt a deep sadness to know that what is left of a thriving community right now is, and I think there's ongoing efforts to try to preserve and revitalize some areas, but again, it's the community memory that I think was lost in what was Plum Alley and Chinatown. And this is a similar story to Japantown. It's a little different, but Japantown, similar to Plum Alley, was a thriving community. It was built on resilience and paving new paths and opportunities for Japanese immigrants. And from 1942 to 1946, thousands of Japanese Americans, as we know, were forcibly relocated to Topaz, which is an internment camp in Utah's desert. Was an internment camp in Utah's desert. And due to the proximity of Topaz, many of the Salt Lake Japanese community who primarily lived in the Japantown neighborhood were allowed to continue operating their businesses and remain in their homes. But once they returned, they faced a lot of scrutiny even before and after the war. And nonetheless, in the face of all this, they strived to prosper until the Salt Palace essentially demolished the area and displaced most of the community. And what was left were two stalwart religious institutions, which we now know as the Japanese Church of Christ and the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple. And they strive to maintain that sense of place of what remained of Japantown. And today, literally today, I believe, they are unveiling a new Japantown design and block that is scheduled this evening, I believe, to celebrate the collaborative design strategy that will bring back elements of Japantown and start new conversations about how to preserve and create new memories around what is the Japantown community and the Japanese community story. So this, for me, this design, obviously it's not, I need to advance the slide. Sorry, I need to be better at multitasking here. There we go. So this idea that a community-informed design is a healing strategy, I think really rings true for this example, especially because it was a process. There were many, I think, bumps and roads along the way to better understand what the community needed and what they expected and what they required to maintain that sense of place. But it has shifted to a more community-informed priority approach. And I think that is a strong example of how we can continue to move towards progress and resilience and keeping that community memory alive. And I want to share one more example here So another journey that's not exactly like Japantown's revitalization, but an example, I think, of organizations becoming more proximate to communities, includes our shared history of redlining in the Salt Lake Valley and beyond. So our division prepared a story map, which I can share a QR code to later in the presentation here. But it's about the history of redlining. And I learned from just different interviews I had with folks that it was, harmful perceptions making their way into policy that really resulted in systemic issues, and so many communities resulting in experiencing the harm today around those exclusionary land use practices. And I think that as we connected with folks and learned more about just redlining stories, I was able to learn more about descendants of Black settlers in Utah, who shared with us that the families like the Chambers family, the Bankhead family, were landowners and essentially helped settle areas like Mill Creek in parts of the North Salt Lake area. Again, blew my mind knowing that this was something that I hadn't learned in school, hadn't learned in any of the learning kind of institutions or experiences, being born and raised Utah. But it was a powerful story for me to better understand how we need to seek out those opportunities and actually spread that even more. So as you know, redlining, in 1939, it kind of became a little bit more prominent, and the Chambers family and other Black families in the area, again, were landowners. And once redlining became more prominent here in Utah, the right to own land was challenged, and this was started by a state representative around the time that sponsored a bill for a law that would force Black residents to move out of their current areas and into an area called the Black District. So according to the Salt Lake Telegram that we were able to find and recover with help from state history, we learned that this proposal was met with protests, and it included a strong hero of mine, Lucille Bankhead, which I learned a lot about, and 75 different Black residents at the time who showed up to the Utah State Capitol to protest against this act. And eventually, the right to own their land it prevailed, and it was able to stay afloat. But again, discrimination and harmful perceptions to bury those stories and experiences of Black Utahns at the time didn't allow for this to be celebrated as much as it should have been. But I do want to note that in 2020, the Chambers family and other ancestors of Black settlers in Utah joined in celebrating with Mill Creek City for the renaming of 3205 South to Chambers Avenue. So this, to me, was a step in the right direction toward true reconciliation, but I saw it as a step, and also preserving community memory. So when people drive down that street, they're able to look back at that sign and question who were the Chambers, and hopefully that sparks some curiosity and better understanding of what the community memory of that area was and is, and recovering a lot of those stories that I think that have been lost. Again, it took me until my senior year of college, honestly, to learn about many of these place-based experiences of displacement, resilience, and renewal. And I kind of struggled with this idea that, me having someone lived in Utah my entire life, and I, love Utah, and I plan to, live here for a very long time. But I hope that also kind of brings to mind and a call to action to just get to know the communities that you serve more. And again, you may already have been familiar with some of the general details of these stories, but I think there's so much more that we can, learn and grow deeper and more proximate to. And this is, I think, for me, the biggest connections between all these stories that I want to make, that we continue to not just build proximity, which for me is an awareness of these stories, is a telling of these stories, but that we also build reciprocity. And for me, this is an understanding that every place has a story behind it, obviously, something that connects the community to the history, future, and values of that built environment, but also that we should seek opportunities to co-create solutions, ideas, and systems that will support community values, that will build on and lead a legacy of having that memory continue to live. So the big question here is, how do we get both proximate and reciprocal? And I want to kind of preface that with another story, personal of mine. So whenever I visit a new place, or whenever I just want to kind of explore and have some free time on my hands, I like to go on city walks. And I was talking to someone about that a little bit before the conference here, but I truly see murals and public art as an expression of a community or an area's values and needs. And ever since high school, like I've loved the concept of murals. As a proud Latina, muralism has strong roots in the Latino culture. And I think that for me, it's an area's canvas. It expresses the history and the concerns and the hopes of a community. And it's also a powerful combination of collaboration and expression. Hardly ever will you see just like one person working on a mural. Like if they're gigantic, you'll have many people. It's a whole process. People will help design, kind of build the vision, build the idea around what that mural will be. And it's a full process. It includes so many people. So I see this as an art medium, obviously, but also sometimes as an amplifying tool towards advocating for needs and stories and conversations that we need to have as a community. And it's encouraged me to learn more about communities' messages. When I visit a new place and I see something that catches my eye, I take a picture of it, I Google it, and I learn that there's so much beyond what's on that concrete wall that I need to learn about, that is interesting to learn about, and it gets me more proximate to that community. And in that vein, if there's a call to action or something attached to that message, often people want you to do something about it. So I think, again, that's the reciprocal part, striving to understand, build an awareness, but then from there asking, what is it in this message that I need to amplify or I can help amplify to help that community continue to thrive in the way that they see fit? So here we go. Sorry, the clicker kind of delays a little bit, but a mural that is very close and near to my heart is one that I was able to help curate and work as part of my experience with the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. So this idea of mural as an expression, this idea of building reciprocity and proximity through public expression came about because I got connected with a local graffiti artist whose name is Tracy Williams. And my director, Nubia Benya, she is still an attorney, and she had worked for many years as a juvenile defender. So youth in the system are very close to her heart as well. So as we connected more with folks from the Juvenile Justice Services Division, we realized that there was a very big need to help empower the youth in custody and helping them better feel motivated and empowered to see a life outside of detention. So Youth at the Center here, which was the Salt Lake Valley Youth Center, we worked with them and Tracy to build ideas and visions and messages that they wanted to see surrounding themselves with in the detention center. And before you see these colorful pictures, so many different aspects of the mural here, walking into that basketball gym was not hopeful, not motivating, not empowering. So what we wanted to do is, find ways to remind them that their spaces should reflect their stories and their resilience. So with mentorship from my team, my director, we were able to turn this idea into a reality, and it became the Motivated Healing Mural, which is painted here in the basketball gym. It was primarily drawn by Tracy, traced out, but the youth did have a very big role in painting it and in talking about their stories as they were painting it. It became an opportunity to not just do a project, but to connect with them deeply. And I learned so much from them, and the goal was for the youth to see themselves in a light where they could have positive impact. And again, this brought the idea of that your spaces affect you and that your stories ground you. And their built environment now better reflected a more collective community memory and an aspiration to envision those possibilities for an empowered life outside of detention. So, in short, if you don't get anything else from what I shared today, I just want you to know that it's so important to get to know the community that you serve. And knowing them by name, knowing them by their strengths, their hopes and challenges, and having that idea to strive to lead in your work with building proximity with them and shared power and ownership, I think really allows for that proximity, reciprocity relationship to thrive. So working with them in partnership again, rather than in isolation, means co-creating solutions and working with them and seeing them as experts in their needs. And for me, this quote by Leela Watson, who is a Māori Indigenous Australian visual artist, activist and academic, she once said this. She said, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." I love this quote because it connects again to so many experiences that I've had within community engagement and reciprocity building within state government. And I hope that we see again this idea of maybe not always liberation bound up with ours, but our futures are bound up with each other's. And I think we are obviously better together. I see so many people here, and it really kind of fills my heart to see all of us here together in person and online. I know we're all building community together right now and throughout the rest of this day. But as we go out and start to work in our organizations, work in our communities, I hope that this idea comes to mind more often of how are we able to create shared value and shared experiences throughout this process, so that way we all leave the conversation or the experience or the project with mutual opportunities and mutual experiences where we are better for it together. Because often it does come off sometimes as a little bit more transactional. Especially working with state government, I've learned so much about budgets and finances, and often it's what will you give me, what will I get back? But I see power in disrupting that idea more, of shifting from a transactional nature of engagement to a more reciprocal, again, connect versus collecting idea. So this kind of all culminates to a passion project of mine. This is a very long story, and basically me telling you that all of these experiences led up to a project that our division was able to lead out on. And what is powerful about this project, which I titled Multicultural Placemaking and Community Belonging, is that it's a learning and resource hub that has essentially compiled stories, people, places on an interactive website, which features story maps. It has an asset mapping directory, and different multicultural placemaking principles that, again, have been informed by so many of the conversations and engagements I've had with our communities. So it's meant to be a dynamic place for members and leaders to contribute and to share their stories around what makes places resonate, and also what community values to especially preserve. So I won't go into all the details here, and you can ask me questions about the kind of structure and everything, but these are the major components that make up this project. And again, the goal is to provide ways and tools to build greater awareness of the multicultural contributions and stories of our communities, but also invitations and calls to action to create more inclusive spaces. So let's see, I'm gonna go to this one. These principles and resources, which you can find on our website, and you'll have a QR code later on to do that, were again reached because of a multi-phase engagement process that we had, which included a workshop of over 70 middle school students at Glendale Middle School. And I want to spend some time on this because I was having a wonderful conversation with someone in the back, and I won't call them out, but I truly feel that our youth are a underrepresented group. Oh, here we go. Underrepresented group in our placemaking and built environment conversations. And I say this because ever since the beginning and the kind of start of the project, I wanted to make sure that we focused on a youth component to capture what placemaking meant to them and introduce that idea of placemaking, and even starting to plant seeds around what planning journeys, preservation journeys, just that entire idea of built environment professionals. And for a lot of them, when I talked to them, they had no idea that city planning was even a thing. They just thought that the mayor pretty much, provided a vision, and then that was what happened. And it really, like I said, surprised me because I had a fun activity with them where we were able to asset map. And I asked them general questions like, what spaces in your community right now do you feel safe in? Or where do you go to learn something new? And I tried to kind of help them veer away from like the traditional answers of school, my house, which were, obviously important answers. But when I asked them, where do you go to socialize? I was expecting things like the skate park, the, recreation center. But I got so many folks, so many youth that told me that they went to Victor's Tires on the weekends to hang out. I was 100% not expecting that answer, but a good quarter of the class that I was in said that Victor's Tires was the place to be. You went there to be cool. And I asked them, I was just inspired by that question. I asked them, what was it about Victor's Tires that made it so important to them? And they said, well, they have free popcorn. So food, right? They have free popcorn, but also they have weekend events where they have raffles sometimes, and they, put out prize items for like headphones and things like that. And then also a lot of their families actually would go to the Victor's Tires on the weekends to get the car fixed up or get some maintenance done. And it wasn't just like a place to do an errand. It was a place to like connect with folks. It was somewhere to just fill your cup on a busy week. And it was a message to me that a place like Victor's Tires, a mechanic shop, a tire shop, as random as you feel like it is, they built all those elements of placemaking into their space. And really anywhere can become a place in a valuable space, a valuable shared space, when you built those elements of what is needed in the community. For them, it was popcorn. What is desired, which was prizes, right? And what was the feeling they left with? And all of them left with either prizes or filled stomachs with popcorn, but it was that sense of community that they could come back and have the same positive experience every time. So let's all be like Victor's Tires. That's basically what I'm saying. But again, I would not have known any of these things unless I had asked. And I was and am now more willing to be surprised and lead with curiosity and a desire to learn from those that have yet to be asked. Again, these kids were never asked that question, and they surprised me time and time again. So, who have you not asked? What do you consider important and worth preserving? And when you've asked that question, be ready to be surprised, because I'm sure you'll get more answers like Victor's Tires. And I hope you pull out those treasures and those elements of things that you can replicate in your own spaces. So, as I wrap up here, I just want to emphasize again that idea of there is power in meeting people where they are. And again, this is an idea coined by my wonderful colleague, Cristina Diaz-Leon, who has since now passed, and I really want to honor her for this mantra and this idea that I really hope I lead with in my life, because it has changed so many lives through her life. And again, it's something that goes into this next idea here of becoming placemakers and empowering community memory. And I believe this requires two mindsets. One being an equity mindset, which aims to promote fairness, justice, and access by addressing barriers that prevent people from equally thriving. And then a second mindset, which is a co-creative mindset, which is about working in meaningful partnership to understand gaps and co-create solutions, which we hope and strive to never be in isolation from the groups that are most impacted by a major decision. So think about, again, the youth. Think about those folks that have not been asked that question yet. And if they have been asked, maybe they haven't been asked in a space where they feel safe to answer truthfully. So often we can get stuck in the process, we can get stuck in the deadlines and the checklists, but I really invite you to kind of pause and reflect on the questions in your work and strategies about how you can advance that reciprocity and proximity building relationship. And I know you might not be able to see all the questions here, but this first question I want to emphasize is, does this space seek to challenge existing inequalities facing the community? And number two is, are communities reflected in the space, reflected in the physical characteristics of the space in a meaningful way? Number three, is the space well connected and accessible to as many people as possible? And number two, can the space support community values through its infrastructure? So as you kind of ponder on those thoughts and how that applies to you, I want to end with this quick quote by one of my favorite planning scholars, John McKnight, who wrote a book called Mapping Community Capacity, which I highly recommend. And they said, communities have never been built upon their deficiencies. Building community has always depended upon mobilizing the capacities and assets of a people and a place. That is why a knowledge of neighborhood assets is necessary if local people are to find the way toward empowerment and renewal. So, in closing, we cannot truly know what a community needs without getting to know them and inviting them to share stories, memories, and places that truly show the character of their community and what they need to thrive and preserve what they value. And this means having a willingness to invest the time, invest the resources, and the emotional capacity, especially to creating engagement mechanisms that cater to multiple processes and include those maybe, again, that have not been asked the question or don't typically hold the positions that we feel like would have the answers. But I promise you that if we see our community members and the folks that are on the front line using and experiencing the built environments and the places that we're hoping to preserve, we will be surprised. And I think that, again, if we bring those human-centered ideas and collective memories to the forefront, we can create and preserve places that the entire community can resonate with. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to skip to this slide. So in case you want to scan this with your phone, this will take you to a couple different links where you can kind of review a little bit more about what I shared, both through our website and also a short report But I really feel like I've talked too much at you at this point. So if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them, and I will give it to Kelsey to help moderate those. But again, thank you for your attention. And I saw, a lot of folks kind of shaking their heads yes and kind of giving me questioning looks at the same time. So I am happy to answer any questions. I hope that we just all leave with a better sense of meeting people where they are and leading with preserving community memory. So thank you for your time again.
Great. So I was taking so many. Thank you so much, Claudia. I can relate to so much what you're saying. I had the privilege of living in Germany for a few years, and a lot of what you said reminded me of a lot of the memory, the Denkmals that you see in Germany that really make people focus on memory, on a public memory. And I think there's a lot of focus on the sadness and the struggle, but there's a lot of joy that I found in these spaces as well. So I was wondering if maybe you can talk a little bit more about how we can use maybe uncomfortable conversations to not only have to dwell on negative, like to talk about resilience and talk about, these other stories. I don't know if you have any comments that you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
I love that. I also spent some time in Germany, so I totally understand what you're saying. I think going back to that last couple slides that I had around going from what's wrong to what's strong, I think often in the communities that we kind of label as systemically marginalized and underrepresented, we tend to use those deficit-based terms, right? And I've had this conversation quite a bit with our team and with different friends and colleagues I have in the planning world, and it's important to get out of that mindset sometimes of always striving to lead with what's wrong with this community, how do we fix this problem, because often we forget about what is already there and what strengths and things we need to amplify. And I think an example that I can bring of this has to do with, again, my friend Cristina Diaz de Leon, who was our COVID-19 community organizer at the time. And the problem, I guess, right, was vaccination rates in our Latino communities. And instead of leading with the issue of our community, has a sense of distrust, there's all these things going against them to feel safe to get vaccinated, but she instead led with the idea of what is a very strong sense of place area that will bring people that are people already going to, and what that place ended up being were the Rancho markets, right, all along the Wasatch Front. And not just that the Latino community uses those spaces. A lot of our multicultural, everyone in the areas see Rancho markets as an asset to their communities. So I think to answer your question, leading with what do we find valuable in this community first? What stories and experiences are strong and unify us? I think eventually leads to that problem-solving capacity. But I think it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations too. I've learned since, and I have a classmate here that has taken a class maybe with me on what conflict mediation and resolution is, and I've grown very accustomed to the idea that conflict and discomfort just exists. Like, it just is. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just a natural emotional reaction to what happens when something is different and new to us. And that doesn't have to be scary. It can be. Like, obviously, we have every right to be afraid. But I hope that just accepting that it is a natural part of our, biology and just us as human beings, I hope we can get to that space again of where we can start having those more proximate conversations with people about what they find valuable and how we maximize and amplify those ideas to the point where we all benefit from it.
We're limited on questions, but is there anyone in the audience that had a question? Yeah. Let me give you the mic.
So congratulations on your degree. That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
One of the quotes you had up there was something I didn't get it exactly, but if you've come to help, you waste my time, but if your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together. Can you break that down a little bit? Because it sort of suggests to me that as a white person, I am not welcome to partner with a Latino community or Native American community or a Black community, even though I might have skills that could guide them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I think that, that is an important distinction to make here. And what that quote spoke to me, and what I hope that the message brought about, was the idea that if we lead with the idea to fix someone or fix a problem or fix a community, no one is ever going to receive that right. It's going to come with resistance because people don't like to be seen as projects. So I think just centering that around your identity, like you mentioned, I think we need everyone involved in this work. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning, as part of our project, it's really structured around a call-in of making sure that we're assessing and getting a better sense of the assets in our communities. And as part of that, just connecting people. I'm in conversations right now with folks like EDC Utah and different kind of business centered folks that don't want to enter a space without truly understanding who's already there and what strengths they have, and how those practitioner-based tools and resources can better connect and amplify to what's already happening on the ground. So I really appreciate your question, because I want to make sure that I emphasize that as part of that quote, it's again centering around the call-in, the call-in idea of we need everyone willing to invest in the work to help solve these very systemic and deeply rooted issues around placemaking and thriving in place. And that isn't just up to one person. I think it's something that we have to consider systemically, again, like I mentioned. And I see everyone in this room having a role, especially knowing that you are planners, architects, designers, historic preservation estate managers, again, that are on the front lines often with community members in asking them what's important, what is worth preserving. And again, I think that it's important that we see ourselves engaged in this work, not just as one person, but as organizations, as communities. So if you feel like this work is not for you, I promise it is. Even just that idea that you feel like it doesn't apply to you, I hope that you feel like this is my invitation personally to call you into the work and to just be more mindful of those that you work with, and to strive to ask that question again of who have not been asked. What is worth preserving in your communities? What stories and memories do you want to make sure that are maintained as a result of this built environment? So, yeah.
Perfect. I want to ask 20 more questions, but I'm conscious of time. And I do want to say one thought, too, of what you were saying in that question. The Main Street America program, which there's a session today, there's a wonderful woman who's a part of it who always says, we're not working for a community, we're working with a community. And I think that's the mindset, right? We're not there to fix, we're there to be together. And so I just love that of, always keeping the door open and always inviting people in. And hopefully that's what we can do today, right, is expand our networks, improve our skills, learn a little bit more, maybe get a little uncomfortable with some questions, and take this forward to the next day. So to just sum up, you talked so much about memory, working with communities that are there, and Utah's changing, right? The demographics are going to be vastly different. We have people coming from out of state, out of the country, so if there's a way, quickly that you can summarize that up, how do you think organizations could prepare? Like, what's something that they can do to be prepared for this huge demographic change in the work that you're talking about today?
Thank you. That's a very big question. I will try to sum it up into just one or two sentences here, but I think my invitation to you all is to just keep learning and to see equity, engaged practices in your work as not necessarily a destination, although there should be milestones along the road, but more of a journey to better understand the people you work with, both within your organization and outside of your organization, and striving to provide opportunities to those that have historically lacked those opportunities to thrive. Something that my director, Nubia Peña, really leads with, which I love and appreciate, is that this work requires your head and your heart, which again goes back to that question of resources, tools, budget, time, investment, but also that heart component. And she calls it a heart posture, which I think is a very good visual to me, again, of where is my heart positioned? Is it positioned to preserving, my self-interest right now, my organization's self-interests, and how can we posture that just slightly differently so that way when we are talking about what is worth investing in, we're inviting and widening that decision-making table, opening the doors, asking ourselves the question of who is missing from this space, who is missing from these conversations, so that way when we provide opportunities, solutions, and recommendations, that those ideas and those end-all solutions are not done in isolation of the people that are going to be most impacted. So that was way longer than I thought it was going to be, but thank you. That was a good question.
Can we thank Claudia one more time?